September 23, 1983. It's the end of the evening shift for the staff at the Kentucky Fried Chicken outlet in Kilgore, Texas. As the last customers leave, there's a lot of laughing and joking. It's Friday night, time to have some fun. The main door then swings open. A warm breeze hits the startled staff. "We're closed," says the assistant manager. None of them return home that night. The next time anyone sees them, they're lying dead on the ground, executed. Let's now try our best to understand what happened that night. First, the victims. They were Opie Hughes, 39, Mary Tyler, 37, David Maxwell, 20, Joey Johnson, 20, and Monty Landers, 19. Tyler was the assistant manager, Hughes was one of the staff, as were Johnson and Maxwell. Landers shouldn't have even been there that day, he just popped in to see the two young men. We know that the staff had already pretty much finished up for the night. They'd almost finished cleaning up the place, the money had been counted, and the franchise headquarters had been called and been told about the takings. During the call, though, some voices could be heard in the background, possibly the voices of the killers. That phone call was the last time anyone heard the staff speak, besides the killers, of course. At around 11 p.m., Mary Tyler's daughter, Kim, walked into the restaurant expecting to see her mom. What she found instead was an eerie silence. Perplexed, shouting her mom's name, she looked down at the floor. She panicked when she saw fresh blood. The cops were soon on the scene, but none of the staff could be found. At first, police assumed that some hijinks had taken place and the staff maybe had a fight, or someone had an accident, and possibly they were all nearby. No one thought massacre, but that's what it was. The next day, about 15 miles from the restaurant at a remote field close to an oil well, all 5 victims were found. The first police on the scene couldn't believe what they saw. It looked like an execution from a war crime photograph. All the victims were lying face down in the grass and dirt, their arms tucked under their bodies, their heads all pointing northward. 4 of them were close together, while the other body of Opie Hughes lay not so far away. They'd all been shot in the back of the head, with at least one of them also taking a bullet to the back. Danny Pirtle, who would lead the investigation, later said in court that it was plainly obvious how they died without having to wait for autopsy. What he didn't know is that the carnage he was looking at would become one of the worst unsolved crimes in modern U.S. history. Well, it remained unsolved for over 2 decades and to some extent still is partially unsolved, but we'll get around to that. As some of you sleuths out there already know, a lot of murders are committed by people very close to the victim. You rarely have to look further than a spurned ex-lover, a jilted friend, or an angry business associate to find the person responsible. But in this case, things just didn't look that way. The murderers got away with around $2,000 that night, but even so, killing 5 people over such a small sum didn't make sense. What's more, it wasn't as if the staff were all connected other than the fact that they worked together. Sure, the young guys were friends, but police knew fairly certain that they weren't involved in gangs or high-level drug activity, and they weren't prone to hanging out with women in their late 30s. The crime looked like the work of a maniac. But then, the most messed up killers out there don't tend to take the money too. They kill for fun, for sport, to attend to some crazed sexual fetish, but they don't usually run off with the loot. At first, the investigators wondered if the murders had anything to do with a methamphetamine ring that had filled the streets of Kilgore with that pernicious drug. They knew that the ring was looking for a new recipe for cooking meth. Aside from that, after prolonged binges, meth heads do tend to lose the plot sometimes. But when they spoke to the manager of the branch, the manager said, no way, those folks were not part of any ruthless criminal gang. They weren't meth sellers, and she believed they weren't even meth consumers. Speaking later of one of the 20-year-old men, she said, they were good, they were exceptional, they were good kids. The police started looking at Kim, Mary's 17-year-old stepdaughter. She recently started working at that KFC, and she had a somewhat checkered past for a young person. So much so, she spent some time at the Louisiana Home for Girls after exhibiting behavioral problems. But why would she have had her mother killed? Why would this young woman have a beef with a bunch of guys just a little older than her? That line of inquiry led to nothing because Kim had absolutely no reason to have anyone shot. It seemed to the police that a robbery had taken place, but perhaps one or more of the staff had refused to hand over the cash. Some kind of fight ensued in which one of the staff was injured. Not wanting to leave any witnesses, the gunmen then abducted the staff and took them to that oil field to kill them. Still, the autopsy didn't state that anyone had died before anyone else. It revealed that all of them were lined up at the oil field and they were shot one by one. Only Hughes, who was dragged away, was shot separately. There were few clues to work with. Cops found a fingernail in the clothing of one of the bodies. They found traces of another human on Hughes's body, but the best clue was a bit of blood on the ground and a blood-stained napkin lying nearby. As we said, there was also some blood in the restaurant. It didn't look as though it had come from any of the victims. Perhaps, the police thought, one of the staff really had put up a good fight and injured one of the perpetrators. People came forward and said they saw a van at the restaurant that night, which could have taken the victims away, but there was no CCTV back then in the area, and those witness statements statements were vague at best. Police also looked at two men named Romeo Pinkerton and Darnell Hartsfield. They were cousins and they both had a checkered past, while another man linked to those two was also on the police radar. But then jail records seemed to point to the fact that Hartsfield was in jail at the time of the murders, so that trail went dry. Such a slaying, something of the utmost brutality, put a lot of pressure on the cops. That's not always a good thing. It can make police join too many dots, and as we all know, many an innocent man has gone to jail when the police can't quite look past the picture they've already formed in their mind. It's called having a cognitive bias, and quite a few people have spent time on death row because of it. The police were quick to join the dots when they were arresting a man named James Earl Mankins Jr. He had a pretty colorful rap sheet, mostly for drug convictions. Notably, Mankins' father was a state representative. Police discovered that the fingernail they found looked as though it came from him. He was also missing a bit of his. A man named James Rowe said he approached the police by himself a few months after the crime. That night, he said he saw men driving a van and he noticed that in the back of the van were people wearing uniforms. What's scary is he said he heard them yelling and screaming. He also said the driver of the van was a white guy with long hair and a beard. That fit the description of Mankins, although Rowe was never asked to testify. Why people never approached him again, we don't know. It wasn't until 20 years later that he did testify, and he said he went to school with Mankins and the man in the van wasn't him. Later, in 1995, DNA evidence pointed to Mankins' innocence, and the case against him was dropped. Some years later, it would be discovered that this fingernail the police had been so dead set on investigating actually came from one of the victims. Mankins later told the press, "The worst part was the 6 months in jail over there thinking about being put to death for something I didn't do. And more than likely, if it wasn't for that DNA, I would have been on death row." The case went cold again, and it looked as though they'd never find the killers. A detective later admitted that the police had spent way too much time focusing on Mankins. Tunnel vision is an investigator's worst enemy, so sometime later, the Rusk County Sheriff's Office called a former FBI agent named George Kinney and asked him to look at the case from different angles. It seemed to Kinney that, given the severity of the crimes, whoever had done it had very likely committed more crimes in the years that had passed. It would be fair to assume, he thought, that the murderers were in prison for crimes as he began his investigation in the early 2000s. In 2001, a forensic scientist named Lorna Beasley retested the DNA evidence the police had and ran it through something called the Combined DNA Data Indexing System. That way, she could ascertain if the DNA from the blood found at the crime scene matched the DNA of violent offenders currently behind bars. Two names popped up. They were Romeo Pinkerton and Darnell Hartsfield. She thought. Those guys were suspects at the start, but we rubbed them from the list when it was discovered one of them was in jail when the murders happened. That wasn't true. The cops had messed up in that regard. On the night of the slayings, he'd been out of prison 2 days, but the evidence still wasn't enough to charge the men for their crime. It took 2 more years for a Texas Attorney General prosecutor Lisa Tanner to get on the case. She had doubts about finding the culprits so many years after the crime. Witnesses were getting old, and she said there were quite a few holes in the entire story. She also realized that DNA evidence pointed to 3 men committing the crime, not 2. What she needed was DNA from one of the 2 suspects for whom she did have names. One of them was Hartsfield, and investigators got a break in 2003 when he was arrested. Now, investigators just needed a DNA sample from him, but he wasn't exactly forthcoming about that. So, investigators embarked on a plan that had fooled many criminals in the past, offering drinks or chewing gum and then testing the remains. With Hartsfield, they got an added bonus. He flat out refused to give investigators a DNA sample, and that was his legal right. He even stated that in a letter. Oops. Tanner later told the press this. He told us he wasn't going to give us his blankety-blank DNA. And then he was so adamant about it, he wrote us a letter saying, "I'm not giving you my DNA, and you can't make me give you my DNA." And then, of course, he licked the envelope and sent it to us. In 2007, facing the death penalty due to the new DNA evidence, he admitted to murdering those 5 people. Still, he said he only did so because 5 life sentences was better than a shot of lethal drugs into the arm. Pinkerton also received 5 life sentences. Hartsfield has since spoken from his cell, and he hasn't changed his story of being innocent. He once said, "I might have had crimes that I did do. You know what I'm saying? But no one ever got hurt. I would never kill these people. And from day one, I have stated my innocence, and I'm still stating my innocence." The investigators say they have now joined the dots, and the picture they've come up with, they are sure is real. They say the guys, possibly 3 guys, heard someone talking about the takings that evening, but they mistakenly heard 15,000, not 1,500. Some reports we found said 2,000 was taken, and some said 3,000, so we can't be sure just how much was stolen. Investigators investigators think the robbery just went wrong, and for some reason they abducted the 5 people. Why they murdered them all, they just don't know. They admit that the crime cannot be said to be solved until that third person is arrested. The DNA evidence found on Hughes' body does not match Hartsfield, Pinkerton, or Mankins, or anyone else in the DNA database. The guy we mentioned at the start, former Detective Pirtle, said, "I think about it every day, and I lie awake some nights with it on my mind. It's been a big part of my life, and though I'm retired now, I still want the third person." Hartsfield fought his conviction, and in 2010 a court upheld it, saying the evidence against him was solid. He still claims his innocence today, saying the real killer is still out there. Now you need to watch something spookily similar, brutal true story of what they didn't tell you about the Burger Chef massacre. Or have a look at this maniac, the werewolf, world's worst serial killer.